Paul Hunter, Director of the Strategic Management Institute in Melbourne, Australia. Welcome and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's talk about strategy. What does strategy mean to you in your everyday environment?
That's a very good question. It's one I'm asked very often because strategy is used in everyday life. It's generally aimed though at a short term, it solves a problem, provides direction and guidance, which is pretty straightforward. But when you put it into the context of the environment we're talking about, it's much longer term. So in a business context, strategy to me is about setting long-term direction and guidance, so policy. But the actual definition becomes to me more important in the context of purpose. So what is the organisational purpose over that long period of time? And in that context then it's about breaking up the concept of strategy into different parts. So the main purpose is to provide direction over a long period of time, but then we do a strategic plan which is different to strategy, and that plan becomes a short-term solution. And then it provides guidance to the organisation in three areas, I think. One is leadership, so it provides the direction for leadership. Hard to lead an organisation if you don't understand or you can't articulate where it's going. It provides the basis for organisational response. So a lot of then things that we could relate to strategy, such as competitiveness, such as organisation design, such as organisational transformation and renewal, are all about responsiveness. Strategy then provides the guidance to that. And then the third element is solving wicked problems, and I use the term wicked there deliberately because they really are the complex problems that, again, the short-term strategy typically doesn't get too involved in. But long-term strategy is about how do we solve these long-term complex problems, wicked problems, and it becomes an iterative process. So problem solving is both an input and output. Part of strategizing is problem solving, and the outcome is a problem solved. And I'd finish the question then with the observation that strategy is not a process, it's a system. So you've got the relationship between a strategic plan, the short term, and the long term through a strategy, and a lot of things along the way, which I call strategy evaluation. And so if you do a scenario analysis, for example, what does that mean? Well, it feeds back into strategy. So it's an interactive, iterative system, and it becomes a process when you start to look at implementation.
All right, so could you give us a concrete example of strategy in action?
As an example, as an education institution, we've only just set up 2 years ago. A lot of that then was all short term in that context, in the sense that we worked out what we wanted to do, but we're unsure of a lot of things because it was pioneering. So over that 2-year period, you'd be familiar with emerging strategy. We've been practicing a lot of emerging strategy in the sense that we try some things, and if it works, we go with it. If it doesn't work, we pull back. So, for example, what type of programs, what sort of accreditation for practitioners. Programs started out with a clear view that it would be foundation of strategy, so fundamentals of strategy, the sort of content you'd obtain in an MBA program, and then our practical strategy, which is how to actually put it into practice using a framework we've developed. But where that's ended up is as a masterclass, so it's a combination of the two. And senior executives, as opposed to the less experienced executive, the senior executives are very interested in doing that because they get the concepts. They don't need to go back too far or into too much depth in terms of an understanding. So what we're able to do with the masterclass is crystallise a mix, and again come back to the theory. What is the view? What is strategy? Come back and draw out their current understanding, put it into a context, and then go forward. And all that emerged from what I thought would be much more clearly defined classes into a more executive development program. So long term, we understand what we want to do. It's about accrediting practitioners, giving them recognition for a field of expertise. and providing the training, the coursework, providing the networking opportunity through ongoing seminars and programs. So it becomes a continuing, ongoing program, professional development as opposed to just a one-off. That's all working out fine, but in the short term, we need to respond quickly to what the market's saying.
My last question has to do with the Strategic Management Society Interest Group for Strategy and Practice, of which you are an active member. And I was wondering, in which way has this interest group been useful to you?
Well, the fundamental with that is that the reason I'm a member and the reason I participate in the Strategy Practice Interest Group is that I learn current thinking, current research. I get good outcomes, good information from that. So the Strategy Practice Group is fantastic for me in that it's getting more now into the actual doing. We know what that is, but it's getting into the doing of strategy in a way then from the more econometrically based theoretical side. But where we go, what I'd like to see a lot more of is the actual doing, and by that, the two things I think would help a lot if the research could become far more creative in its approach, and again more looking at what people are doing, but also looking at the tools, even revisiting some of the tools. And I'll give you an example. It occurred to me just recently, I've been rather outspoken in my criticism of SWOT analysis as a very simplistic way of approaching a strategy session. And it's occurred to me though recently in searching, because again we have this framework that we use to explore where scenario analysis fits, where blue oceans fits, whatever. But we don't have an explanation for how, well, we have an explanation, but we could strengthen our approach to the doing component through engagement, through tapping into the way people think and just socialising generally. So good old SWOT analysis now has a new meaning for me, because there's two things we can do with it. One is, rather than just have a SWOT analysis that says what are your strengths and weaknesses, it's, well, here's a structure for strategy that we use in our class. What are your strengths, weaknesses, threats and opportunities in that context? So now we have a lot more structure around that analysis from the econometric stroke tool use. But when you actually look at what SWOT is, strengths and weaknesses, threats and opportunities are all very much emotive, sense-giving emotions. Emotive things that actually engage people and encourage them to think more strategically, particularly when they're in an environment. So again, whilst it's not highly useful in its own right as a management tool, when you think about it in the context of engaging people, encouraging them to be motivated and emotional about the topic for the conversation, it's quite a powerful tool. So again, strengths and opportunities. The macho men like to strut their stuff and then protect and look after their home base whilst out. So that's the looking after the threats, and then the opportunities, out hunting, if you like, looking for new opportunities. So that tool in itself, in that context, changes dimensions. So the research so far has been extraordinary, the depth and the analysis and so on. Maybe there's some opportunities there to revisit what we've already got, but equally it's about then looking more at what we do, and that's where the analysis into workshops and other things like that are also very useful.
Paul Hunter, Director of the Strategic Management Institute in Melbourne, Australia. Thank you once again so much for joining us today.
Thank you again. Appreciate it.